I'm going to start with something a little bit different today. I think this is important. I think this is a good way to get some insight into some of the really like the worst talking points and the worst propaganda right now being spread by some on the right. I think disappointment, something really disappointing happened on Tuesday on the Joe Rogan podcast. Dan Crenshaw took Joe Rogan for a ride. I don't know how else to say it. Dan Crenshaw is a Republican congressman, and he is increasingly in favor with Trumpists. He came to prominence, sort of fell into favor with Donald Trump when he defended Donald Trump's handling of coronavirus, which is, I mean, I can't imagine a bigger failure for Trump than coronavirus, a global embarrassment. And Dan Crenshaw came to the forefront saying, look at how great of a job, actually, Donald Trump has done on this issue. And sadly, Joe Rogan got taken for a ride by Dan Crenshaw's slick but wrong claims about all sorts of different things. And the reason I'm saying that Crenshaw takes Joe Rogan for a ride is that it seems pretty clear that Dan Crenshaw knows that he's BSing. Dan Crenshaw knows that when he tells these lies, these are lies. He's not ignorant. He is smart enough to know that he's saying untrue things. And some of them he gets past Joe Rogan. Some of them Joe's kind of BS meter goes off and he says, hold on a second, does that make sense or doesn't it make sense? But there's this sort of cult of personality that's developed around Dan Crenshaw as if he's some epic truth teller of conservative truths that are irrefutable. But really, Dan Crenshaw, it's sort of Ben Shapiro-like with a lower pitched voice. He says things that are wrong. Lower pitched voice and slower speaking cadence. Dan Crenshaw, like Ben Shapiro, says things that are wrong, but says them confidently. And oftentimes people don't challenge him. So let's jump in. Thanks to Scott, one of our viewers, for sending me some of the notable moments from this interview. Here is one moment on the topic of Medicaid. To his credit, Joe Rogan's BS meter does go off here, but Crenshaw's mildly prepared. So let's take a look at it and then discuss.
Yeah. So instead of spending all this money on Medicaid, for instance, take the people who are eligible for Medicaid and even above that, right? And you could have a tiered program. Instead of wasting all that money on a Medicaid program that doesn't have improved outcomes, by the way, every study shows this.
What do you mean by that? It doesn't have improved outcomes?
It means that when you compare people from the same socioeconomic status and they're in Medicaid enrolled or they have no insurance at all, their health outcomes are no different. So again,
is that malarkey? Is that fucking around with statistics?
It's a lot of studies have shown this.
But hold on a second. You're talking about someone getting medical care or not getting medical care.
No. They still, because you always get medical care.
Okay, so the claim is, if you're going to do this, you first have to be really clear as to what the claim that's being made is. The claim being made by Dan Crenshaw is that people with Medicaid do no better in terms of health outcomes than people with no insurance, assuming they're of the same socioeconomic status. So 2 people who earn $22,000 a year, one has Medicaid, one has no insurance. Dan Crenshaw says they have the exact same health outcomes because, as he says, people with no insurance can still get care by going to the emergency room and not paying their bill, or by going to a doctor and not paying their bill, or whatever. So Medicaid really does nothing, but it costs money. Medicaid is bad in that sense. Dan Crenshaw cites that there's lots of studies that say this. Research this, and you will very quickly figure out where this comes from. This claim that people do no better on Medicaid than without insurance, given the same socioeconomic level, all goes back to one study called the Oregon Health Insurance Experiment. This is from 2013. This is like, this is meat, right? You need to understand this stuff to understand these talking points they come up with. This is a 2013 study, and it looked in Oregon and said what happened when Oregon did the Obamacare Medicaid expansion, and a bunch of people who previously didn't have health insurance got Medicaid, and then we followed some of that people. Now, some of those people. It's true. The study claims that, quote, this randomized controlled study showed Medicaid coverage generated no significant improvements in physical health outcomes in the first 2 years, but it did increase use of healthcare services, raised rates of detecting diabetes and managing diabetes, lowered rates of depression, and reduced financial strain. So let's analyze each finding individually. The main important one that is at issue with Dan Crenshaw is the people who got the Medicaid coverage generated no significant improvement in measured health outcomes in the first 2 years. But when you look at the details, you very quickly realize that this is an almost meaningless claim. How did they measure health outcomes? They looked only at 3 factors and only for 2 years. The 3 factors that were used were blood pressure, cholesterol, and what's called glycated hemoglobin levels, which measure diabetic blood sugar. And they tracked just those 3 indicators for 2 years. Now, I hope that it's becoming clear how slippery that is. Any other improvements, eliminating pain, treating infections sooner, lowering BMI, none of that is there. All they looked at is blood pressure, cholesterol, and glycated hemoglobin levels. These aren't even close to the most common reasons people go to doctors. The most common reasons that people go to doctors are skin issues of various kinds, joint pain and arthritis pain, back pain, respiratory issues, including colds that start to affect respiration, flu, bronchitis, pneumonia, COPD, emphysema, anxiety and depression, neurological issues, headaches and migraines. And yes, you also have on that top 12 list towards the bottom, cholesterol and blood pressure. So the study that Dan Crenshaw is talking about, he may not even know what his talking point, that his talking point is actually based on this study. It didn't measure anything about changes or outcomes related to 10 of the top 12 reasons people go to the doctor. It's meaningless in this context. And by the way, it only looked at 2 years. Many of these things, unfortunately, take longer for people to successfully treat and improve upon. So when he says the people on Medicaid don't do any better, measured only by looking at cholesterol, blood pressure, and diabetic blood sugar, doesn't make sense. Very incomplete. And by the way, the study also found that when people got Medicaid after not having it, and you compare the 2 groups, they were detecting that they were diabetic or pre-diabetic. They were managing that at a higher rate. Depression rates went down and financial strain went down, which is a good thing. So it's a complete and total gaslight. Dan Crenshaw is spouting something that is almost completely meaningless. It's wrong. It's the opposite of the truth. And Crenshaw is really pernicious, specifically because he sounds so normal and calm and confident and knowledgeable when he says things that are totally wrong. Compared to, for example, like when you hear Madison Cawthorn speak, he doesn't inspire confidence. When you hear Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, not only are they saying things that are wrong, they sound totally not credible. When Dan Crenshaw says things that are wrong, he actually sounds credible. Let's look at another example.
And this was something that came out, like, whenever someone says, I want to make a list of people, like, hey.
It's a little like fascism.
Yeah, you're getting dangerous here. This is a weird thing you're doing.
The biggest lie of this century is that there's this like American right-wing fascism. The only fascism I see is, well, I mean, the most blatant example is the Antifa crazies who deliberately engage in fascist tactics to implement their little form of utopia. But also, like what we're talking about in Georgia, all these woke corporations engaging in what they're engaging in, this is fascism, this forced conformity.
Yes.
Like, and fascism, there's lots of kind of definitions.
Look at Dan Crenshaw claim that everybody else is misstating what fascism is, that some say fascism is only Hitler. And he'll tell you what the real fascism is. And he says corporations expressing an opinion about a law they don't like is fascism. When Coca-Cola criticizes the Georgia voting law or says MLB says we're not going to do business with Georgia, Dan Crenshaw wants you to believe that that's fascism. And he liked this talking point so much that he used it last night on Fox News as well. We won't go to that. Dan Crenshaw, much like Donald Trump used to say, wants you to believe everybody else is lying to you about what things are. I will tell you the truth, but then he lies to you. He says all of these other people are saying that this is fascism, that's fascism. No. The real fascism is Antifa, which is an anti-fascist group, and corporations criticizing Georgia. That's fascism. Fascism is when a system of government or a movement or a regime puts nation and sometimes race above the individual and has centralized, autocratic, authoritarian government, often headed by a dictator, with severe economic and social regimentation and forcible suppression of the opposition. When a for-profit corporation is free to say, we don't like this law, we might leave Georgia, and citizens are free to say, oh, I like that idea, I'm going to support Coca-Cola, for example, or I don't like what Coke is doing, I'm not going to support them, I'm going to boycott them. That's not fascism. That's free market economy. That's it. That's all it is. But people fall for this stuff because he sounds so confident when he says it. Here's another whopper that we've dealt with before on immigration.
So you think that most of the people that are progressive that look at this immigration issue and are more liberal and they're more open to this idea of open borders, the reason why they're doing it is because they're kind of compassionate, but they haven't looked at the actual statistics of what this means and what happens and why and what's the incentive? Is that what you believe?
That would be a kind way.
A kind way.
It depends on the person.
What's the unkind way?
You want more illegal immigration because you want them to eventually become citizens and vote for you.
Right.
So I think at the higher ends of the Democratic patriarchy.
So Joe Rogan says, right, like that makes obvious sense. Democrats want more immigrants because the immigrants will eventually become citizens, vote for Democrats, and so Democrats will win. First of all, it's actually unclear whether more immigrants becoming citizens really means a substantively impactful majority of Democrats over Republicans. Certainly Latin American immigrants other than Cubans and even some Venezuelans who in sort of like an anti-Maduro, anti-Castro reaction, Cubans and some Venezuelans tend to be sort of more to the right. Other than that, Latin American immigrants certainly lean left. But the Cato Institute, which is a right-wing think tank, researched this, and they said the question of whether immigrants are really more left or more right is a complicated question with lots of moving parts. The point is, even if immigrants skew left 55 to 45 or even 60-40, that margin, this is a really long play. This is a stupid way to try to win elections because for every 100,000 immigrants who after 5+ years, remember, you come to the U.S. with a green card. Takes a while to get the green card. You need to be in the country 5 years before you can apply for citizenship. Getting citizenship can take 1 to 2 more years. That's like 7 to 8 years for what, a 60-40 margin? After 7 years, for every 100,000 new citizens, if it's 60-40, you're only netting 20,000 voters, right? This is a very stupid way to try to win elections. And it's sort of like when the right says, oh, Democrats are trying to win by having people vote twice, like drive to one polling place and vote, and then drive to another polling place and vote under a different name or whatever. Do you understand how much work that is to try to actually swing an election? And much the same way, waiting around 7 years for like what's maybe a 55-45 or 60-40 margin on new citizens that are naturalized voting for it's incredibly stupid. So you really have to be political parties are barely able to plan ahead 2 years. And Dan Crenshaw wants you to believe that Democrats on what is really a small margin of Democrats over Republicans in terms of naturalized citizens are planning 7 to 8 years in advance as a strategy to win elections. It doesn't even pass the sniff test when you think about it. And again, unfortunately, because Dan Crenshaw says it so confidently, people fall for it. And if Joe Rogan is going for it, at least partially, you know that many in his audience are. So I could go on and on, a dozen such examples. Dan Crenshaw totally taking Joe Rogan for a ride with easily debunkable nonsense. And increasingly, Dan Crenshaw is becoming a hero of the right wing. It's sad, but it's also dangerous because these bad ideas spread and they get repeated with almost no critical thinking applied to them whatsoever. Let me know your thoughts, in particular if you saw this episode. You can find me on Twitter at @Pakman. The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%, BETTER21. The David Pakman Show is an audience-supported program. I would love it if you added your name to the hat. Sign up for a membership at joinpakman.com. You can use the coupon code BETTER21 for a beautiful discount. You will get access to the daily bonus show in audio and video formats, as well as a daily audio and video commercial-free stream of the daily episodes. Sign up at joinpakman.com. I was browsing the David Pakman Show subreddit this morning, which is just a few hundred subscribers from 30,000. You can join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. The user Blue Falsata or Falcata, sounding the alarm about what's going on in Brazil. Posting, people in the United States and the world are sleeping on the humanitarian crisis happening in Brazil right now. Only country in the planet hitting 3,000 daily deaths right now. It is almost something biblical, as Sidney Powell would say. Brazil has elected a true genocide as president. I assume they mean a genocidal maniac. It would take a long time to explain the disaster, but he is single-handedly responsible for more than 300,000 deaths. He pushed hydroxychloroquine. He doesn't believe in vaccines, rejected 70 million doses for Pfizer. What's going on in Brazil is absolutely tragic. Brazil, I believe they even had 4,000 deaths in a day. But you know what's really, it's a tragedy what's going on in Brazil. But Brazil still has, as of now, a lower per capita case rate than the United States overall for the pandemic, and a lower per capita death rate than the United States. When you look at Brazil and you see how deaths are spiking and things are completely out of control, we handled this so much worse than Brazil for much of the pandemic during 2020 under Donald Trump's leadership or lack thereof, that our numbers pandemic-wide are still worse than Brazil's. Now, because we're vaccinating so much and Brazil is going in the wrong direction, it's quite plausible that in 4 weeks or in 6 weeks, Brazil's pandemic numbers overall will be worse than ours. There's no question about that. But it's just incredible to think about that. Things were just such a disaster in the U.S. for so long that as bad as things are there, we're still worse off here overall if you look at deaths and cases per capita since the start of the pandemic. Another interesting post from user Harden1701, who says, I watched David talk to that Trump apologist woman earlier, and I have no idea how he maintains his composure while being confronted with such supreme ignorance and disinformation. Attached is an economic study which shows Trump had little positive effect on the economic boom during his tenure. Going on to say, apart from her delusions about how hands-on and CEO like Trump was, she said one thing that really pissed me off due to her gross inhumanity. She told David the immigration problem is no longer Mexican and Central Americans entering looking for jobs. She says the new challenge is 7-year-olds making their way to the border alone or with the help of coyotes and being dumped in the United States. Her very next statement was, if we don't solve this problem, it will have consequences for working American jobs. Does she mean from the 7-year-old unaccompanied minors? Yeah, I got a bunch of emails from the interview with Republican strategist Amanda Mackey earlier this week, and many of them pointed out, David, you didn't push back on this. You missed that insane thing she said. I know. She was gish galloping me, and it's difficult to keep up. You have to pick your battles. You have to pick your battles. And so I focused in on her claims about Trump being responsible for the vaccines. I focused in on her weird claims about how Trump's COVID bills were bipartisan, but Biden's weren't. You have to pick your battles. And of course, I missed things, and I will try to do better next time. But I'm glad that so many in the audience noticed that there were way more things she said that made no sense than the ones that I was able to call out. Join the discussion at the David Pakman Show subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Today, Joe Biden will be announcing multiple executive actions on guns, on firearm safety. It may already have happened by the time you listen to today's show or watch today's clips. This is already angering many people, but it has to happen because we have a gun violence crisis in this country. We have a gun culture crisis in this country. One of the actions Joe Biden is expected to take is to deal with what are called ghost guns, guns without serial numbers, sometimes which can be made at home. Biden is expected to direct the administration to start a process that will require buyers of so-called ghost guns to undergo background checks. A question remains about exactly what Joe Biden is going to do. And again, but by now, meaning when you're listening to today's show, we may already know. Biden previously called on the Senate to pass stricter background check rules. The House has already passed them. These would make background checks apply to every gun sale and transfer. It would give the FBI more time to conduct background checks. Whether something related to that will be part of the orders, we just don't know yet. Joe Biden might announce some regulations on concealed and or assault style firearms, maybe prohibitions on firearm purchases for those convicted of domestic violence against partners, maybe something about alerting law enforcement agencies when potential buyers fail background checks, that these are people you may want to keep an eye on as they may try to obtain a firearm some other way. Potentially federal guidance on home storage safety measures. There's a whole bunch of possibilities, and we'll know them very soon if we don't already. But what we can be absolutely certain of is that a huge portion of the American right wing will be against whatever Joe Biden announces. They will say all the things that they always say. And to prepare you for that, we need to not lose sight of the big picture. Whatever Joe Biden announces or announced today changes nothing about the Second Amendment. We have a Second Amendment. People have a right to own firearms. None of Joe Biden's orders will change that. Joe Biden essentially has no choice but to do this. And why? Think back to the Sandy Hook shooting. When Democrats had the White House under Barack Obama, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and nearly 90% of Americans supported a law for universal background checks. Such a milquetoast thing, such a basic thing. Democrats still couldn't get it done because of opposition from Republicans, because of opposition from the gun lobby. If you can't get universal background checks done in that environment after one of the worst school shootings in American history, controlling the White House, House, and Senate, and having the American public on your side at an 88 to 90% level, which is almost unheard of in the hyper-partisan American political status quo, I don't know that you can ever really get anything done unless a president just says, I'm doing executive action. So this has to happen. They will say Biden is coming for your guns. They will say Biden is ending the Second Amendment. None of it is true, but let's see what Joe Biden does or did, if it already happened, depending on when you listen to today's show. And then we will talk more about the implications of what he does. But it has to be done. There's no other choice. You know, you hear from the right. Some on the right say, well, we should work together. The left, the Democratic Party shouldn't act unilaterally. What choice do they have when 90% of the country wants background checks and Republicans still don't? So once we know exactly what Joe Biden signs, we will have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram page. Make sure you are following us there at David Pakman Show on Instagram. The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. Every once in a while, probably every 2 months, we have a last-minute guest cancellation. Sometimes they are the really immoral no-call, no-shows. Today, our guest actually is just feeling under the weather, so we're rescheduling them. But the upside is I get to hear from some of you instead via the Discord lines at davidpakman.com/Discord. Let's go today to Ron from South Carolina. Ron, what is going on today?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, David, I just wanted to I've been hearing a lot about Georgia passing voting changes, and I'm not really sure what's going on with that. How's that making voting harder? Because I hear people say that a lot.
Okay, yeah. So Georgia and a number of other states. So big picture, Republicans didn't suppress enough of the vote to win in November of 2020. So very shortly after Joe Biden was sworn in, something like 250 something various bills across more than 40 states were put in place. And many of these make it more difficult to vote by putting in place stricter voter ID requirements, by limiting the number of places at which people can vote, by limiting voting hours. And you can find, the exact details of every bill online. But that's the general idea. And these are often tailored to none of these bills are ever overtly written in a way that is sort of classist or racist. But as we've talked about before, you can fine tune and disproportionately impact certain groups. You can target poorer people, for example, by making stricter ID requirements where to get the ID itself is always free. But to get the ID, you can put in place more and more requirements for what documents you need to show. Some of the required documents to get the ID aren't free. And if you're poorer, you may even have to take a day off from work in order to go and pay for the document that you need to get the ID. And that's how you can, for example, disproportionately impact poor people.
I heard about, and they're also making it illegal for people to hand out water in these really long lines. Stuff like
that I did look at that. I don't understand the full exactly how that's written. That broke while we were on break, but I don't know if that's in an official capacity you can't hand out water, or if just nobody can give water to anybody else that's in line. But yeah, I did read that.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, David.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you very much. Let's go next to Tristan from Kansas City, Missouri. Tristan, you're on the air.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So I actually climbed up the pipeline to deconvert myself from a stage of conspiracism. So in 2016, I was basically QAnon before QAnon was a big thing.
Really? Like, what were your beliefs?
Well, I found some YouTube conspiracy theorists that basically said that Obama was going to declare martial law and all that crap. And
yeah.
He was going to lock all the Christians in FEMA camps. And they showed all this quote unquote evidence that, that pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. I found that before it was even like popular.
Now, let me ask you this. This is super interesting. Let's take one of those, which is Obama will lock up Christians in FEMA camps. When you fell for that, did you actually go through in your head, like, okay, what would be the authority that comes up to do the locking up? How would they identify who is Christian? Like, did you think in that level of detail?
Well, there was a big theory that the whole world was behind it. It was like a secret cabal, and they have everybody's information. So they know based on your internet history if you're like a Christian. So they would come and they would take away all the people who qualify under a specific criteria.
Right.
And it's a real mess. My whole reason for coming on here is to tell you that there are more people like that than you think. You go to, to find a radical leftist, it's really hard to find. You could probably find some at some college campuses, but I swear to God, these people, these crazy QAnon people, they exist at every single dollar store you go to in the Midwest.
Right.
And I want to know, David, how you handle all of this, how you handle all of this insanity. Like, does it keep you up at night? Are you like nervous for our future? Because the further we get into this and the further we get into seeing our climate getting destroyed and seeing all of this misinformation come, does it ever scare you for the future knowing that more and more people are losing their minds?
Well, listen, if you're paying attention and you're not scared, then you're not understanding, right? But I do think that applying Stoic philosophy is relevant. Understand the limits of what you can control. I can work to inform people about what's going on with the climate, but ultimately I can't control the outcome of whether we deal with climate. So I really do try to remind myself that there's not much use in worrying about things that are beyond my control. I can certainly do my best to inform, and I can control that. But ultimately, a lot of these issues are bigger than any one person. And so I think it's important to bear that in mind. I take weekends off from the news and from politics, and I think that scheduled breaks are also good. But yeah, if you're paying attention, you understand what's going on, of course you would be worried.
Okay. Thank you, David. That pretty much it. I just wanted to know, what was going on behind the scenes with.
Now, Tristan, what happened that you stopped believing this crazy conspiracy stuff? What got you out of it?
Well, it's funny. Most people talk about the alt-right pipeline, how people, climb down this rabbit hole to, find crazy ideologies. For me, it was conspiratism, and then I found an episode of Joe Rogan talking to Alex Jones, and that actually introduced me to Joe Rogan. I started watching him, and then he had on a few progressives. I watched TJ Kirk, the Amazing Atheist, and he debunked a lot of these conspiracy theories. And then from there, I found secular talk, and now I'm listening to you and Vosh and people who would be considered more on the far left end. But I'm very skeptical with that too. I try not to fall down any more rabbit holes of fringe ideologies. I try to keep it pretty neutral most of the time.
Well, it seems like you have a framework now where anything you hear, you will then evaluate for yourself and research further rather than taking anyone's word for anything, which seems good.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I've learned my lessons from that.
Tristan, congratulations.
Thank you, David.
All right.
I appreciate it.
There we go. Very, very important stuff. Extremely important stuff. Let's go next to, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Is it Alida or Alida?
Yes, it's Alida.
How are you, Alida?
I'm good. I can't believe I'm talking to you. I watch you every day.
Thank you.
My question to you is in regards to the voter suppression bill in Georgia. And
yes.
Of course, there's been something like 253 other legislations going to all 50 states.
Yep.
Is there something, if they don't get it resolved, is there something that Joe Biden can do to override these voter suppression laws?
I don't know that there's anything Biden can do, but there is much that the House and Senate can do. And there's currently a bill that would enshrine certain voter enfranchisement, voting rights protections. It's unclear whether that's going to pass. I think that this is not something Biden can do directly, but it's certainly something the House and Senate can do in a way that would create a framework that all states have to meet certain guidelines, and states wouldn't be able to go beyond or ignore some of these federal election guidelines. So that's the path forward, I think.
Okay. In order to do that, they would have to get rid of the filibuster, you think?
That's a good question. I mean, listen, I think I don't know the answer. I would like to think there's a way to get it through the Senate without blowing up the filibuster. But yeah, I mean, you're definitely onto something. It's conceivable that the filibuster would need to be done away with to pass that. Yeah, that's quite a possibility.
Okay. Well, Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure, Alida. Great to speak to you.
Good to speak to you too. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Alida, perfect phone call, I would say. Why don't we go next to Trent from Miami? Trent from Miami, you are on the air.
Yes, hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. I have a question about the border wall and the possibility of Biden restarting it, and there was that was a rumor that I think was floating around yesterday, and Representative Ilhan Omar said it would be really bad for Joe Biden to continue building Trump's racist border wall. And I had a discussion with my best friend about whether Trump's border wall comes from a racist place or not, and I was more leaning on the side that the wall, since it was being pushed by certain right-wing pundits and Trump and Steve Bannon behind the scenes, that we're kind of leaning into this racially tinged socioeconomic populist rhetoric, that because of that, the wall is inherently racist. But my best friend wasn't seeing it that way. He saw it more as, well, we need border security and we need to solve our illegal immigration problem. So I don't really see where the racism comes in. That's what my best friend said. So I wanted to ask, what because it's these past 4 years have kind of all blurred together, with everything that the former president has done.
I gotcha. Yeah. So the question is whether I think it's racist. So listen, please do what you can to silence your Discord. The blings are just unbearable. That's in the call-in guide. So please check that out if you're unsure how to do that. Here's the thing. To say whether a wall itself is just a wall. So I don't know that we can say that a wall is racist. I think the question is whether the intentions of those looking to put up a wall are racist. And to be perfectly frank, I think it doesn't matter. I don't even engage with that issue, because the point is the wall doesn't really achieve what we claim to want to achieve. It doesn't really fix the issue of undocumented immigration. Only a third of undocumented immigrants are physically crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. 2/3 are overstaying visas, just flying in for a trip and never going home, etc. The wall can be defeated, as we've seen, with like $150 in parts from your average hardware store. And the wall doesn't deal with the economic situation in the countries from which people are coming. And a far better investment would be to deal with that by working with those countries. So, a wall is a wall. The reasons for building it can be racist. Some of the people who want the wall are racist, some maybe not. But I don't know that it really matters too much, because there's other bigger issues with the wall and with immigration policy that I would focus on.
Great. Thank you, David.
All right. I'm going to let you go. Thank you. Yeah. Instructions on how to silence those Discord blings, because those people get very upset. I get a lot of emails saying, David, I can't listen to the calls when the blinging and blinging and blinging. Let's go next to Chris from San Antonio. You were on the air. Chris from San Antonio,
hey,
you were on the air.
Hey, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well.
Good. So I've been listening to your show a long time. Appreciate it to be on. I guess I'd consider myself progressive, but I do take some issues, I guess, with some of just the thought pattern that some progressives have. Like in terms of like, just for example, like Medicare for all, like I do think that's a good idea and I do support that, but I don't think it's like the, it's going to fix all the problems, I guess I would say, with the healthcare system in the country. It's really health insurance is Medicare for all. And, coming from a medical background, 80 to 90% of the diseases in the country are preventable. It's, mostly related to diet and things like that.
Is it that high? I mean, I know it's significant, but I've never heard 80 to 90%.
That's the figure I've heard. I mean, it's really looking at diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, those type of things where, the American diet is just so bad.
Yep.
That it's really causing a lot of those problems. And unfortunately, if we have Medicare for all, I just feel like it's going to exacerbate, people's bad, health decisions.
So I don't think Medicare for all will exacerbate people's bad health decisions. I do agree with you that Medicare for all is neither a panacea nor the only way to go about getting people universal coverage. I think it's one way to do it. I think there's other countries that have other systems that work quite well. And what I tell people is for me, this isn't partisan in any way. I just want the best solution. And one of the best books, I think, to read about how Medicare for all is one option, but there are others that around the world work as well. Uwe Reinhardt's last book, which I think was actually published posthumously by his widow, is one of the best books for explaining the balance that any healthcare system has to find on a triangle between access, quality, and cost. Every system is just picking a point on a triangle between those three axes, so to speak. And there's nothing magical about Medicare for all. In that sense, I agree with you. It's one way to go about it.
Yeah, what I would love to see more focus on is preventative care in the country.
Of course.
So, like, just for example, why couldn't there be, food stamps for all that can only be used for, the most scientifically proven healthy foods in the country?
Yeah, that's not the way I would go. No, the problem is when we start saying, because then you get into food stamps can't be used for ketchup because it's processed. I think that's micro. I think we need a macro strategy of, like, for example, shifting to where health providers are paid for keeping people healthy rather than being paid for the number of things they do to a patient. That's like a macro change. It's less about controlling what food stamps can be used for. I disagree with you there, respectfully, of course.
No, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, and it's, obviously the politicians are going to be responsible for the people, and the people just say, no, I want to eat this,
right.
It's not going to go well for them. So, I understand that, but I do wish also progressives would focus a little bit more on the meat, dairy, egg industry, because I do think it really correlates to a lot of things progressives care about, the environment, healthcare, just living conditions, both for, the people, that are working in those fields, as well as, the animals, or just, all that's just all swept under the rug. And, the average person really doesn't, understand where their food comes from. So I just kind of wish progressives would take that battle on. But
I would encourage people to read Michael Pollan's books on the food industry and these things. And, things keep pointing to not eating factory foods, buying ingredients rather than food products, and having a modest amount of certain types of meats in your diet. Over time, all these diets come in and out of favor, but really we just continue getting more and more evidence of the things we suspected 20, 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And the final point I would love to see is, smoking really dropped down once, there were warnings were put on the packages. I think that's a route they could go with meat products, considering they are considered class 1 carcinogens. So, if you put,
I don't know about that. I know that bacon has been definitively shown, if I recall correctly, to maybe be carcinogenic. I want to make sure I'm being careful in what I say. But some of the healthiest diets around the world contain, modest amounts of meat. So I think we want to be careful about, these broad sweeping statements.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a 2015, the World Health Organization did classify any deli meats, so that includes hot dogs, any sliced meats, class 1 carcinogens, 1A or something like that. So it's like the same category as smoking. And
I would stay away from the processed meats. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for the call. Chris from San Antonio. Glad to have been able to speak to a few folks today. Our guest canceled. That's not good. But then I got to speak to a few of you, which is great. We're going to take a break, and we will be back with more right after this. The David Pakman Show is now on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can check out behind-the-scenes pictures, memes, shots of the studio, shots of what Pat does all day. Very, very concerning to a lot of people. All of that and more on the David Pakman Show Instagram account at David Pakman Show. So as we talked about earlier this week, those who are still Republicans overwhelmingly still support former President Donald Trump. The numbers, thinking back to the Monday show, something like 80% of Republican voters still view Donald Trump favorably. Something like 70% of Republican voters want Donald Trump to run for president in 2024. That's not the problem. Increasingly, the problem for the Republican Party is that there are fewer and fewer Republicans left. And what I mean by that is that the number of Americans who identify as Republicans or as independent-leaning Republican is down to just 40% as of the first quarter of 2021. Now, on the other hand, the number of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents is up to 49%. That's a 9-point gap, 49 to 40, for Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents over Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. This is now the biggest Democratic advantage that Gallup has measured, dating back almost a decade to the fourth quarter of 2012, when Barack Obama was reelected. And this is something that Gallup measures regularly. And what Gallup has found is that there are some very specific reasons why so many voters have abandoned the Republican Party. I don't think any of these are particularly surprising. Number one, Joe Biden winning the 2020 presidential election and being inaugurated just after the humiliating and disastrous January 6th Trump riots has pushed millions of people away from the Republican Party and either towards being independents or towards the Democratic Party. The expansion of coronavirus vaccination has helped move people away from the Republican Party. The passage of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package has moved people away from the away from the Republican Party towards the Democratic Party. Now, to be very clear, this is not the biggest gap we've ever seen between Republican and Democratic registration. If you go back to sort of the 2006 to 2009 era, Democrats actually had a double-digit advantage in registration there. If you go back further, almost 30 years ago, in 1992, around the time of the election of President Bill Clinton, Democrats also had a double-digit advantage at that point in time. So this is obviously very bad news for Republicans in theory, if it translates into how people vote in 2022 and 2024. But we should temper our expectations, and there's a few things to keep in mind here. First of all, in a country where often half the country doesn't vote, or, if turnout is really high, 35% of the country still doesn't vote, having a 9-point, a 10-point, a 12-point party registration advantage doesn't necessarily win you elections. If you're looking at it from the Republican perspective, having a 9-point party registration deficit doesn't have to lose you elections, depending on who actually goes out to vote. But we can actually control that with turnout. If we get out the vote, then we can turn that party registration advantage into a real world benefit. There's a bigger problem we can't control, which is that within states, you have such outrageous partisan gerrymandering right now that was done by the Republican Party, where just to win half of House seats, Democrats need significantly more than half the votes. And that is also a real problem for the Democratic Party. But probably the most important takeaway here is we've been saying that Republicans have launched more than 250 voter suppression bills across more than 40 states because too many people voted in 2020. The results in 2020 were proof to Republicans we didn't do enough voter suppression. We need to suppress more vote. And that's why they are now filing and pushing more than 250 voter suppression bills. There's another aspect to this. This party registration data, Republicans seeing we are hemorrhaging voters. We are seeing attrition of Republican voter registration. That also is making them realize we have to suppress more votes. We have to pass some of these 250 bills. The Republican Party believes that when they are winning, it's a free country and they're winning because they're winning the battle of ideas. But when they're not winning, this is a socialist, tyrannical, authoritarian nightmare executed by communists such as Joe Biden. And they will do anything they can on that basis to win elections. Now, one last thought here. Just because there are fewer Republicans, gerrymandering aside, voter turnout aside, just because there are fewer Republicans doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of those former Republicans are going to go out and vote for Democrats. They may not vote at all. They may no longer be Republicans, but they will still vote for Republicans when they see who it is that's on the ballot. Unless you can turn this registration deficit or margin, depending on which side you're looking at it from, into election victories, into political victories, they are merely interesting numbers. Now the question is whether Democrats can actually do anything with it. I'd want to get you caught up on something we talked about at the start of the week. Fox News comedy show, and I'm using that term very loosely. Fox News comedy show Gutfeld debuted on Monday night, and it's maybe the least funny comedy show that I've ever seen. And one of the questions I asked on Monday was, why does right-wing comedy not work? Many of you weighed in, and I'm going to have some of your thoughts in a couple of minutes. Somehow, in the first week, the show has gotten even less funny. Check out a couple of these clips from last night's episode. These terms, they're of questionable meaning. Here is a sketch or a skit about how if the Masters golf tournament is racist, then anything with the word master is therefore racist. Take a look.
Somehow this voter ID law was racist. Meanwhile, they still have the Masters, right? Yeah.
It's called the Masters. If master bedrooms are racist, the Masters are racist. Masturbation is racist. Master Chef is racist.
What is masturbation?
I don't know. Is your dad watching? Oh, your dad's in the audience. Very good. Joe, I am dying to find out what's in your brain.
Who thinks that's funny? The only funny thing about it is I can't think of anything that's really funny about it. Now, one of the big controversies around the Masters has actually been that Augusta National Golf Club doesn't allow women. And then that's getting mixed up with the Georgia voter law stuff, which are, racially suppressive along racial lines. The jokes don't even make sense, never mind being funny. For the third night in a row, they did another segment about CNN supposedly being obsessed with racism. 3 nights running, the exact same joke, even though I don't even know what the joke is.
Vacation isn't the goal. Conflict is. And once you see this framework, it shows up everywhere. I mean, take a look at what's on CNN right now.
Grandmas are systemic racism.
Candies,
if you don't call your grandma and tell her she's a
it's
racist,
all racist,
you're a racist.
Maybe the bear does have a point there.
The bear is a racist.
He is a racist.
So 3 nights in a row with that one. I don't know if they can't come up with anything better or they think that one's really working. It's not clear. If it was a good joke, I could maybe see going with it, like go with what works. This is not a joke that's working. And I also am wondering, like, is there really a studio audience or is the laughter just employees who are hanging out in the room? Because it sounds very, very sparse. Like, it's all very strange, every detail. If you were trying to make a satire of right-wingers doing a comedy show, this is what a Saturday Night Live skit about right-wing comedy shows would look like. But this is actually the show. So now on to your comments. I asked on Monday, why can't right-wingers do comedy? Why doesn't it work? And I got a bunch of interesting responses. Many of you wrote to me and said, David, the reason you said, sir, the reason right-wing comedy doesn't work is because right-wingers want to watch news channels and get angry, not watch news channels and laugh. I think there's probably something to that to some degree. Another idea is that right-wingers become motivated and activated by disinformation that's presented as fact. So when they have disinformation presented as comedy, they're not sure, like, are we supposed to laugh? Are we supposed to take it seriously? Are we supposed to rant in all caps on Twitter? Like, what are we supposed to do as a result of this? A bunch of people made some pretty aggressive comments about intelligence, saying, if you're dumb enough to fall for what Fox News reports as news, you probably don't have the intelligence to understand comedy or satire or parody, and it's the wrong audience. In other words, the idea that an appreciation of humor requires a level of intelligence that your average Fox News viewer lacks, that's a very aggressive statement for sure. But maybe there's something to it. You tell me. One person wrote in and said, the problem is that the jokes are both lazy, but too mean-spirited. You really need them to be clever and slightly mean-spirited, like they're not calibrated correctly. One viewer suggested that the problem is that it is humor, but it's basically an adult version of the high school bullies making fun of the one disabled kid or the one black kid. So it just comes off as like crass and inappropriate rather than funny. That's a pretty interesting analogy, actually. There may be something to that. And then last thing, and there's a common thread to all of these. Someone wrote to me and suggested they're not really doing satire. They're expressing the same contempt that they express all the time in a way that they hope will get people to laugh. And it just doesn't work. I think there's something to all of these critiques for sure. Let me know why you think this right-wing comedy idea is not working. Let me know how long you think this show will last. As I told you on Monday, the half-hour news hour, which was the last attempt at comedy by Fox News, it lasted 17 episodes. I don't remember if that was a weekly show or a daily show. 17 episodes on a weekly show is 17 weeks. 17 episodes on a weeknight show is like 3.5 weeks. I don't know. But tell me how long you think the Gutfeld show looks like it's going to last. We have a voicemail number, which is 2192-DAVID-P. At the top of the show today, we covered the Dan Crenshaw interview with Joe Rogan. I got tons of messages and voicemails about it. Here's one that's asking about sort of like what's going on with Dan Crenshaw. Take a listen.
Hey, David, did you happen to catch Dan Crenshaw on Joe Rogan last week? Is he just stupid, or is he just pulling this to continue the tired conservative logic on how taxes and society should work? I think he's just as dumb as Madison Cawthorn and Lauren Boebert and the like. Where are all the intellectual conservatives in the government?
So I addressed this a little bit in the first segment. I think that Dan Crenshaw knows he's BSing. From everything I know about Dan Crenshaw, he's smart enough and informed enough to know that the things he said to Joe Rogan a couple of days ago and the things he said on Fox News last night about what is fascism and Medicaid and, immigration, I think he knows that it's BS, but he correctly believes the average Trumpist will believe it. If your position is that, no, Dan Crenshaw really is ignorant, let me know. But my best assessment right now, and it can be difficult to tell sometimes, is that Crenshaw is gaslighting, not Crenshaw is stupid. We have a bonus show today on which we will be discussing the push for a fourth coronavirus stimulus check. There is a push for this. We will talk about it. We will also talk about a Utah law that requires biological fathers to pay half of pregnancy-related medical costs, period, regardless of anything else. And lastly, Jeff Bezos has come out in support of a higher corporate tax rate, which Joe Biden is now pushing. My question is, if you deduct your taxable income down to zero, does it matter what the corporate tax rate is? In other words, if Amazon is paying 21% of zero or 28% of zero or 35% of zero, why the hell does Amazon care what the corporate tax rate is? I think that there's a propagandistic element to this, which we will talk about on today's bonus show. Get instant access to the bonus show simply by signing up at joinpakman.com. I'll see you then.